Buenos nachos, amigos, and welcome to Record Breakers, a music podcast where a group of friends gather together to share music with each other, an album at a time. It's like a little book club for music, fun time had by all. I'm Petey Rave, and here with me is my team, my squad, my crew. We've got David.
Take us out, Mr. Petey. War Factor 4.
We've got Drew.
I almost forgot to unmute my mic.
And of course, here with us, still in the fourth chair, our guest, Mike.
Hello.
We're here together, hanging out, mostly ranting about boxing promoters before the show and things like that, and other things.
Yelling about basketball.
Exactly. Mostly that guy is yelling about basketball. But we're here to talk about an album. We're here to talk about music, and the provider of the album this week is David. David, what have you brought for us this week?
Hailing frequencies open. This week on the Record Breakers podcast, listeners and fans, I believe I brought an album that I'd had in my chamber for quite some time. And I like to have albums kind of in the back of my mind to bring on for when we have certain specific guests. And I think having Mike Will on this was a good example of one. I think this was one that both him and I were aware of from an artist both him and I were aware of. And it was the critically acclaimed 2019 album from famed R&B producer and singer Raphael Saadiq and his album, Jimmy Lee.
Let's talk about expectations. Drew, what expectations did you have coming into this album?
Well, it was a name I knew. I mean, you listen to this style of music at all, it's a name you're going to recognize. I mean, was in Tony. He was produced some of the biggest records. It's a name, right? But I had not heard this album. So I was interested to get into it, just knowing his background and knowing his chops. I knew it was going to be something that was going to be pretty good. Probably an R&B and soul flavored affair, but other than that, not really much going into it.
Mike, what
Go Pat, I'll say that.
Yeah, Mike, what expectations did you have coming into this?
Well, yeah, as David said, this is an album I'm pretty familiar with. But back when it did originally come out, I wasn't sure what to expect because before this, he hadn't put out an album in like 7-8 years, like a solo album. So I was just happy that he was putting something out. I had no idea what it was going to sound like. The only thing I could really guess was I feel like anytime the title of an album is a name of somebody, I'm like, oh, we're going to get a story of some sort. There's going to be some kind of theme here. Yeah. I don't know what it's going to sound like, but it's Raphael Saadiq, so I'll just listen to it.
Yeah. I wasn't sure exactly what we were going to expect, what we were going to get. I heard the name, but I didn't realize he was one of the guys from Tony. I'd not remembered or whatever. But I'd heard the name, but I wasn't sure exactly what to expect. Like pinpoint. I figured there was an area that was going to be, but I didn't know quite what to expect, and I wasn't even realizing what I was getting as far as like experience. A time experience, for as far as the performer. Even when I was listening to it at first, so. It was a fascinating, a fascinating anticipation going into this. I was looking forward to it. Yeah, let's dive in. David, how would you describe this album musically?
I would describe this album musically as a very personal R&B album, I would say I'm going to save the album that I compared it to and the album that I think it invoked for the conclusion when we get to the spot of the show before our Haiku Reviews. But this is definitely an R&B album that is a watershed moment. Maybe not necessarily in the genre, but at least for Raphael Saadiq's career as a musician. It's a watershed moment for him. It's a watershed album. It has every kind of complete sense of production that you would want from a professional R&B artist that doesn't necessarily need to have an album full of features on his album. He doesn't need that. Raphael Saadiq is talented enough and savvy enough and a good enough producer to where he doesn't need to load his albums with features from top 40 artists. And it is a very personal album on his part. The album does tell a story, as Mike mentioned. It tells the story of his brother, and it tells that story as a point in a larger message that you'll hear later on in the album. And I think it's one that you really should sit down and give a good listen to. You can enjoy the grooves, you can enjoy the vibes, but you should definitely really sit down with this one and just kind of absorb it as an R&B album, as a complete R&B production.
Mm. Drew, how would you describe the sound musically? All right, you're muted.
Children. No, I want to.
Not even once.
Before it leaves my head, David mentioning he doesn't need a bunch of features or anything. I think the opposite thing sort of happens if you get asked to feature on an album. Like Raphael Saadiq calls you up and be like, "Hey, I'm making an album and I need an extra oomph on this song. Can you come bring it?" Like that's a rub for you, I think, more than anything. Like it's the opposite problem, which I think is awesome. And there's some great ones here. But this is one of those things where this album is beautiful, right? It is a really well done, well thought out album. I try to give a listen or two before like I listen, like while like looking up the history and all that sort of stuff, right? I listen without the context of what was happening, and then I listened with a little bit more context of like, okay, where were they at as a person? Like what was going on? Was this album really? And like diving into that, and diving into why the album's called Jimmy Lee and like all of those sorts of things, and sort of weaving that back into it. There was always this feeling, and what was conveyed really well, to my opinion, of this like forlorn pain, which I think gets permeated a lot, and there's a lot of different reasons for that, as we sort of allude to here on a lot of the different sort of lyrical themes, the social themes, and how that ties back into his brother. And I think it's really, really well done. You can tell when something like that is well thought out and well portrayed, from a musical standpoint. The production is insanely tight. I will sometimes lament the fact of things being sometimes overly produced, to a ridiculous degree. Thinking like, okay, what are you trying to hide? What are you trying to smooth over and stuff like that? Whereas this is something where he's a producer. Like this is like one of the things that really good at is production, right? And it's something where, okay, he has a passion for that side of it, obviously, with the number of things he's put his chops to. So it makes sense. And because of that, and because of how it feels pieced together and thought out, it just makes this package that, like you said, is a complete package. It is completely thought out, and it's insane the level of weaving that goes into that.
Mike, how would you describe this album musically?
It's heavy. It's a heavy listen, but I love it though. I really like this album a lot, but it's like soulful, but it's like sad, somber. It's gritty at times. It's slightly funky. We got some gospel in here, which I'll get into a little bit later. But no matter like what sound the production was, I feel like it all tied back to this just feeling like, man, this is like he really poured his soul. He poured everything into this. Because I definitely the first time I listened to this, I felt it. Like some like albums, they hit kind of different, and I could tell when I was listening. It's like, oh no, this came from like he was really going through something when he wrote this and made this. Because I definitely felt it. But the production is amazing. The songs are very well crafted, but it has a really just kind of heavy undertone to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is. It is like a nice modernization of like the neo soul sound. It is soulful. It has also R&B elements. It has those moments where it ebbs and flows, going into like darkness and into like into a sense of upbeatness, but you can tell that there's not necessarily a positive aspect to that, upbeatness, like because it's exploring a person's mood like on a high, like it gets its highs and its lows, and like in more ways than one, and it does that really well musically by the mood of the song reflecting the mood of the person, of the narrator, the person singing the song. There's songs that are definitely in the first person view of Jimmy Lee, on his highs and on his like lows, and his and they reflect it well. Like even when his highs, there's sinisterness to it, and the lows and the contemplation, and it's reflected in like in that way, like in how his experiences, how he's seeing the world through Jimmy Lee, how he's processing his own experiences, his own family life, and his own experiences with drugs and with death and his family, and then with things outwardly, in like shining line outwardly. But yeah, before I end up diving too deep into like individual songs, let's go to that. David, what would be the key tracks that you would zero in on?
I'm going to start with track 2, Drew, you're welcome, with So Ready. It starts off with a quiet groove, and then it builds up and it elevates. Track 3, The World is Drunk. There's a message here, everybody. Listen and pay attention. I'm Feeling Love. It has this chorus that really shouldn't work, but it does, and it's very simple but effective. The song is it kind of feels a bit unfinished at the end, but the vibe is good. The vibe of the song is good. It just kind of trails off a little bit. My Walk is a song that kind of has imagine if it were a James Brown song, but it was on the backbeat instead of the 4. It's really interesting. It's got a steady rhythm, but the song is very raw and very cool. And it gave me sort of a James Brown feel, but it was like a little off time. And it was really, really interesting. Sorry, Petey. Belongs to God. I felt the spirit of Otis Redding, Sam Cooke, and David Ruffin on this track. Track 8, Belongs to God. And after all of that, track 11, Rikers Island, in a very heavy album. This track, Rikers Island, it gives people permission to dance again after what is essentially a very heavy, very personal album. Track 11, Rikers Island, allows people to have a little bit of levity at the end.
Drew, what would be some of the key tracks for you?
Well, thanks for skipping track 1. Starting this album was Sinner's Prayer, super moody, quiet. What struck me first was how open the vocals felt. There was an honesty to it, a rawness that was left on the vocals, that I think just kind of forced you to listen up. It's like, yo, there are gonna be some things said. And it started out very, very heavy. Something Keeps Calling. That song starts with a falsetto and gets into this bass groove. It came off as a single, and I think there's good reason for that. And then if Rikers Island was the like Permission to Dance Again, Rear View is something that the way that tone came through, and the name of the song and sort of the content of the song sort of mixed together in a really special way. One, it's Kendrick. Kendrick Lamar is always great. But the tonality of it has this sort of almost like tape deck in a retail environment feel to parts of it. That mixed with, again, the name Rear View and sort of the subject matter in it, there's a lot in life that is hard and is cyclical. And there is a cycle that even when you seem to break it, doesn't seem to break all the way at times. And I think that that mix of having all of it go into one is possibly one of the, I could say, best productions of hammering a point home for me that like I've heard in quite a long time.
Mike, what would be some of the key tracks for you?
Definitely Sinner's Prayer. I'm really big on opening tracks and closing tracks. Sinner's Prayer for me was definitely a really strong opening. Anytime you start out an album, like the first time I listened to this, I'm like, oh, we're already praying to God. First song. Okay, this is about to be we're asking for forgiveness and prayers already. This is about to be something. And I love Sinner's Prayer. King's Fall is actually probably my favorite song on here. And that was because the first time I listened to it, that was when the album like clicked for me. Like, oh, he's talking about like addiction. And that's when it all kind of came together. And I understood like what was actually going on, because he's talking about like the relationship between him and his drug dealer. And it just had a real just kind of rawness to it that I enjoyed. My Walk, which was mentioned earlier, that might be like my favorite production, I guess, on the album. I love how gritty those drums were, really gritty. That little synth, I don't even know if whatever that little synth noise was in the background, I really liked. Something about the production of that song really stood out, as opposed to all of the other songs. And of course, the content was also great. Rikers Island, which was mentioned, it reminded me of I got like a protest vibe from that song that would be in like a 70s, that would have came out like 20, 30 years ago or something like that. And I thought it was interesting that through a lot of the album, we get the look of addiction through like him talking about his brother and how, you know, drugs and addiction kind of affect his relationships with people and his environment. And then you kind of get the, with Rikers Island, you get the like mass incarceration, prison system kind of thing going on. So I thought that was actually a really nice touch to throw in here. Man, I kind of keep going. I'll end on So Ready. So Ready for me was like the one song that if you didn't like pay attention to the words, this is the closest to a feel good song as you're gonna get, because it has a nice groove to it, and the hook is really catchy. But like once you actually pay attention to what he's saying, it's like, oh no, this is actually sad too. But it sounds really, you know, it sounds good until you pay attention to the lyrics. Like, oh no, it's actually kind of painful too. But if you want a feel good song, might be as close as you're gonna get.
Yeah.
There are a lot of good. Glory to the Veins, I love that one. There are a lot of good songs.
Yeah.
There isn't a song on here I don't like, to be honest. There isn't one song on here I don't like.
Yeah. Yeah, it starts off strong, like y'all said, with Sinner's Prayer for everything y'all mentioned. Like, this world is drunk, like David said. There's just that the way it conveys the way it conveys its message, the way it conveys that especially like even in the instrumental and how it pairs with the vocals, it just is really nice and really like meaty. And then Rikers Island and Rikers Island Redux in particular. Rikers Island, like I said, it's Motown inspired, and it has like that protest vibe, which actually would be more like 50 years ago for 70s. But like yeah, and it definitely has that vibe, that like tying in how this has been exploring his thoughts on watching what happened to his brother and his other siblings, but channeling it through his brother Jimmy. He ties it into how it ties into the experience of people at large and the diaspora at large, but in particular in America, and the Deaf Poetry Jam that followed the song. It was well placed. It's just a strong poem, specifically set to like a reprise of the beat. But it is just like, okay, here's the song, and if you didn't get it, here's just the essay. Like, here's the essay of it, like, which works. It works so well in as a pairing. And then like it's been said, Rear View, kind of like it's a good metaphor to of a song that ends an album, that like, okay, looking back, like, you know, the thought of looking back and what it all meant and things like that. It all works that way. Yeah, let's bring it back around the horn and talk about some conclusive thoughts. Drew, what would be your conclusion on this album as a whole?
Sometimes we've called albums homework because of the music academia of it. I think this is the first time I will say there is learning in this, but more on the themes. The production quality is great. The album is amazing. The way each song flows into one another in the themes of the lyrics, like we've said, it deals with a lot. But the way it fits it together, I think, is, I want to say beautifully done. that makes it sound happier than I think the album is. But it is. It's a beautifully done record about things that are hard to deal with sometimes. But you gotta. I think it's, like we said, the end of the album, the last couple tracks sort of wrap it back around and give you something to send them home happy in a way. But with a realization of like, hey, like, there's good times, but like, let's think about what's going on here, guys. I think that's really well done. It's something that those type of albums, I think, deserve more credit and more mainstream recognition than they sometimes get.
Mike, what would be your conclusion on this album as a whole?
It's really good. This album is so good. I feel like it's a lot of artists try to go for the concept album or the theme album, and sometimes it can be like kind of janky, or maybe you'll start off smooth and then it kind of goes off the deep end and you forget what the whole concept was even about. This was perfectly executed. There isn't a wasted song, a wasted instrument. Like, everything really tied into the theme, and he nailed it. Like, he really nailed this. I still feel like this album was overlooked the year that it came out. I don't know. Some albums come out and I'm like, not enough people talked about this to my liking. Yeah. So I'm glad that we reviewed this, because I feel like if you haven't listened to this album, you definitely should. For one, just for the music, the execution of the concept, and also really enjoy. I like R&B that isn't always just about love, like, not to be the sad, but love is cool, it's great, but sometimes
you can talk about other things.
Yeah, you can talk about like other things, and this is definitely an album that proves that. Like, you can really talk about some real life issues, and it can still be musically great, and the vocals can still be great, but the content can have some oomph, some real meaning behind it.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, this album it's really, really good, man. Raphael Saadiq is a supremely talented individual.
Yeah, and you can make it about other kinds of love, like, and more than just like slow jams and
heartbreak
and things like that. And like, this is what this establishes is like the that different kind of like familial love through tragedy, despite tragedy and things like that, and idealization and processing grief and tragedy in your life and in your history, and how that's affecting you, and what that means for you, and it works. And I've listened to this album a lot, and because I don't know if you can tell by the release dates of these episodes. If you're looking at the show notes, it took us a couple of weeks. Things got delayed, and this album was on repeat. I never got sick of it. Like, if I took breaks, it was just because I wanted to bounce off some other playlists, or wanted to listen to the Daily Drive on my Spotify just to listen to NPR. But never did I not like, or not enjoy, or not appreciate listening to this, whether it was on my drive to work or home or sitting here. Like, it was never not welcome in my ears, no matter how many times I spun it, and it is a great complete package. Like, that's the big thing. It's like a great complete package that each piece adds to the album and is important to like each part of the thesis of the album. Like the the highs of feeling on top of the world as a junkie, and the lows of feeling worthless, things like that as a junkie. And it's like, or the feeling like you're not contributing, and all that goes into that. And then tying, like I said, tying it out into this is the personal tragedy and trauma, and this is how it ties into really the bigger picture right at the end, and then and it's a nice bow at the end. This is a tight, well thought out, like fantastic, complete album. It was definitely worth a listen. Last but not least, David, what would be your conclusion on this album as a whole?
I feel like this is an album that is, in a strange way, timeless, but it's also kind of lost to time. It's very organic, it's very real, and it tells a very human story. In the words of Baron Helmut Zemo, it captures the African American experience. And it's funny how Zemo was talking about Marvin Gaye. Funny how a supervillain from a European country has an appreciation for Marvin Gaye, because this album, Jimmy Lee, it definitely gave me feelings that reminded me of what's going on. I think this album, in a way, is timeless. It got a lot of critical acclaim when it came out, a lot of critical acclaim. And I think this is an album that we should be talking about in 20 years, the same way people talked about what's going on 20, 30, 40 years after the fact. I think this album, Jimmy Lee, deserves to be talked about the same way. If you like your music just to be escapism, if it's just something you want to put on and have a good time, this probably isn't the album you're going to look for. But if you do want to listen to it and you want to really enjoy it and absorb it and take it in, you're going to be rewarded with some really fantastic work. I think Raphael Saadiq really showed how talented and creative he is. He really offered up a piece of his soul, his life, and it came out to something, in my opinion, to be just a phenomenal album that I think is something that should be talked about as one of the best R&B albums maybe in the last 25, 30 years. And yeah, I brought up Marvin Gaye's What's Going On. I think this could probably be in the same space as that album. But it's probably not one for just to put on if you want to have a good time. Probably not.
Yeah. All right. Well, those are our thoughts on Raphael Saadiq's Jimmy Lee. Now we get to the main event of the evening, the moment you've all been waiting for, where we sum it all up in our own poetic form. Hit you with the 575, our great dumb bit. Let's get down to the nitty gritty. Haiku numero uno. Drew, what is your haiku?
Beautiful, heartfelt, a remembrance album, and deserves to be heard.
Mike, what is your haiku?
Soulful and somber, the soundtrack to addiction. Rest in peace, Jimmy Lee.
My haiku: strong, emotional, soulful, and so well crafted. Processing trauma. And last but not least, David, what is your haiku?
Saadiq shows his soul, a complete experience. not for the background.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, those are our thoughts on Raphael Saadiq's Jimmy Lee. You can of course find this album on our Spotify playlist. Play Record Breakers the home game. Do your due diligence and your due diligence. Play along at home. Follow along with the episodes. We got 2 playlists, one with the episodes slotted in as appropriate, so it just goes from album to episode as long as it's on Spotify, or one with just the album, so you can just listen to the albums. But yeah, on that Spotify playlist, presumably, maybe, is going to be next week's album, and it's going to be provided by Drew. Drew, what have you got for us next week?
Well, I've been trying to think of something to follow the ridiculously great albums that we've had the last couple of weeks, which is hard. But I went back to the well a little bit. It is a album from a band that we listened to their somewhat final album. They haven't put out an album since the album we listened to in episode 4 of this podcast. So I'm doing the one right before that. Their first album they put out with Hellcat Records is Westbound Train out of Boston with their album Transitions.
Mm-hmm. So look forward to that. But that'll be next week, and this is this week. And you can, of course, find us all over the internet. Press the button. You can, of course, find us all over the internet. David is at Call Me DJM. Drew is at XJuciferX. I'm at PD Rave. The show's at 4 Record Breakers. That's the number 4 Record Breakers. RecordBreakersPodcast.com. RecordBreakersPodcast@gmail.com. Rebelli.net for listening to other shows. Rebelli TV on YouTube and on Twitch. You can kind of watch us live on Twitch as we record the podcast. You can also catch all of our other streams, like my Witcher 3 stream with Daisy. Our Through the Tomes, our D&D show, D&D Real Play show, and our other streams, like my Mass Effect stream, and other games that I might be inspired to play, including when we got, a thing I'm excited about, I can say, Rogue Legacy 2 is going 1.0 at the end of April, and I will be playing it day of. You know this because I love that game. So you can look forward to that as one of those streams. But yeah, other than that, just like, share, follow, do all the social media stuff and all the platform stuff and all the calls to action. Thank you very much. Until next time, hasta los huevos.
Toodaloo.
Bye-bye.
Annyeong. Fighting.
Oh, my foot's asleep.
Oh, what the fuck did the refs just do?
Diamond Club hopes you have enjoyed this program.